Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. I'm Mona Duncan, your moderator, and this program is our gift to you from the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory. Each week, we have a member of the Institute to present concepts so that you can see how they use them in your life and how effective it is. And we are winding up about a 14-week spread out over 14 months with Robert Martin, and he has written a wonderful book entitled, what is it, Robert? Connect and Involve. Yes, and so today he's going to give us kind of a wind-up presentation for it, and it's on involving students in making presentations. So welcome to everyone, and Robert, we're ready for you to take us away.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and shift to the screen here. Is that
That's good.
Okay? And then I need to move this out of the way. Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is Robert Martin, and this is our final presentation on the theme of how to connect with students and involve them in learning, which is also the title of the book that these 14 presentations have been based on. Today, we're going to be talking about teacher presentations that get results. And this chapter is last because the idea of teacher presentations incorporates all of the other ideas in the presentations and in the book. So let's go ahead and get started. Well,
Bottom left.
There we go. Okay, so when we talk about results, what we're talking about is improving attention, understanding, and retention during presentations. Every teacher is involved at some point or another in giving a presentation, even if it's just 5-10 minutes. Even kindergarten teachers give presentations. And so we're going to talk today about 3 elements. The first is organizing material for understanding. Second is using procedures to involve students. And the third is developing stand-up skills. So the first key idea is organizing material for understanding. So here we see the cat unraveling the ball of yarn. And once the ball of yarn is unraveled, then the cat's not going to be able to get it back into a ball of yarn again. It's going to be all messy. So I think the point is here that it's not just enough to know your material. You need to organize it in a way that it's going to make sense to the students, where they can organize it for themselves. So one of the big influences on me was a paper called The Magic Number 7 ± 2. And the idea of this is that we can only remember, whether we're 5 or 55 or 105, 5 ± 2 unrelated things. In other words, basically 5 to 9 unrelated things. But once we see that they're related together, we can remember an unlimited amount of things. So the research has shown that when we organize material to show relationships, that's going to improve understanding and remembering. So one of my teachers always used to say, tell a story if you want to get through to your audience, if you want to get through to your students, which is what we call story form, because as you'll find out, whether it's adults or kindergartners, people remember stories. So if you can put what you need to say into a set of stories or a single story, that's a good way of remembering things. But often we're dealing with more complex organization, what we call semantic organization, where we're dealing with a network of complex ideas. And for that, we need some kind of graphic organizer, a concept map or a word web, a flow chart, some kind of a diagram. And here's an example that'll be familiar to everyone, because this is, of course, we learned this in grade school, and I think it's something that makes sense to us and we remember, and that is the water cycle. And by presenting it in this graphic form and then explaining it and talking about it, the students are saying, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, because they've also experienced the components that are in the diagram here, and then they're putting that together about how it all works together. Here's another example, which is taught in the United States, and that is we all learn something about the United States government. I'm not sure this is the best or the most complete outline of the federal government, but it's certainly a good start. And a teacher can talk from this and even include stories about each of the branches and so on. And we could go on, and there are thousands and thousands of ways of having graphic organizers. So the second key idea is to involve learners in presentations to keep them listening and learning. I really like the little raccoon here, because he or she seems to be paying such close, intense attention. So here's something that works for all ages. You give a 10-minute burst of information, and then you have your learners do something. Now, the interesting thing is, this is something that made a big impression on me when I was doing a 2-day seminar on communication skills in Seymour, Indiana, for first-line supervisors. So these were all adults. They were all people who were about the same age or older than I was. They weren't college-educated people. They were people who were first-line supervisors in factories and in various industries. And I was working for Purdue University Extension. And Jim Wagner, who was the Purdue University Extension agent who basically organized everything, said to me, well, what you need to do, give them a burst of information and then get them involved, have them do something. And it was like, oh yeah, okay, I think maybe I'd better take his advice. And so I worked very hard to do that. And it struck me that, well, of course, if this works for adults, then it will work for high school students, college students, elementary students. And the reason I mention this is because often high school teachers feel that they're there to teach the subject and they're there to give presentations, which is fine. This is about giving presentations. And they feel like the involvement part of what we've been talking about, which is involve students in learning, is not something they need to do. And clearly my experience is, yeah, if you're going to work with adults, then you'd better do this. Give them a burst of information and then get them involved. And I think it is how I've tried to do all of my teaching. So let's just look at some ways of involving learners. And this is kind of a repetition of other things that we've been talking about all through the presentations. But if this is your first presentation, that's fine, because this will be a good way to introduce or review these ideas. The first is ask rather than tell. And I'd always try to keep this in mind. it's just amazing what learners already know, especially when you're first starting to introduce a topic. If you will ask the students what they know about a specific topic, or maybe a subtopic, a big broad topic might be too broad, but maybe something a subtopic, and ask them, well, what do you know about X? What do you know about the Civil War? What do you know about the Revolutionary War? What do you know about the US government, or whatever it is what do you know about fractions? And then they tell you, and you find out, and this allows you to expand and review what it is that they already know. And of course, not everybody will know the same thing, but this gets them involved. The second thing is, over time, you want to involve and monitor everyone. You want to invite everyone to contribute, because that not only involves them, it allows you to monitor everyone for understanding, well, what is this person thinking about? What does this student know and understand? Where are they having difficulty? You need to do this systematically, because otherwise some people will end up dominating the situation, and some people will be left out. I remember one teacher who said, oh, at the end of the semester, I discovered, this was a high school teacher, one student had been sitting beside this cabinet where he was not very visible to me. So I'd never really seen him, and I never called on him. The other thing you need to do is to, my lighting system just fell off. And that'll be okay. Just a minute here. And the other thing you need to do this is unpredictably, because if you're predictable, then learners will decide, oh, well, you're not going to call me today, you'll never get around to me, and so I don't have to pay attention. They might not even think this consciously, but it's just the human condition that if you're a little bit unpredictable, then you're going to be paying more attention. Another thing is note-taking. You have to decide whether note-taking is appropriate, but if it is, and you want students to take notes, then you need to teach them what you want to do. My experience has been even college students don't know often how to take good notes. So you need to teach the students what you want to do. You need to structure note-taking. And there's a whole lot of stuff about this on the internet. Then you need to have students practice the behaviors you want to see them doing in note-taking. And then you need to monitor the results. You need to walk around, see what people are recording. You need to collect them every so often, and so on, so that they're learning to take good notes if you and when you think that's an important thing that you want them to be doing. Another alternate choice is you not only want to show them graphic organizers, you want to have them making graphic organizers, because that helps them solidify in their own minds. And there are an unbelievable number of ways of having students do this. And you can find lots of information on that on the internet, and there's lots of information in the book. Another approach is using team procedures. For example, we've talked about procedures like think, pair, share, and giving people sentence stems, such as something I learned today, and then calling on people, maybe volunteers, just not all the same ones every time. You want to mix up what you're doing. You don't want to do the same thing all the time, but you want to do the same things on a regular basis so that students get used to them and can anticipate how you like to work. The third key idea is the idea of developing stand-up skills. But before we get to stand-up skills, we need to deal with resistance to performing, and the idea that I had that I'm a teacher, not a performer. And I really resisted the idea of teaching as performing. But eventually, I came to realize when you stand up and you give a presentation, even if it's just for a minute, you are a performer. So I might as well get good at it. We might as well get good at it. So one thing I learned from doing theater, which I got into sheerly accidentally, one of a friend of mine who is a teacher said, "Oh, well, they need men down at so-and-so. Why don't you go down and try out?" And I thought, oh, they give me a small part. Well, they gave me a much bigger part and I was terrified. But what I learned is you need to be bigger than you're comfortable with in order to get attention. You need to be expressive in order to get your learners and your audience involved. You need to be willing to look stupid in order to be expressive and big enough to be effective. And then kind of summarizing all this, you need to be uncomfortable you need to be willing to be uncomfortable at first so that you can become more comfortable later. And I was just telling Mona this morning that we just finished up a week ago with 2 weeks of presentation of Beauty and the Beast, in which I played Monsieur Dark, who is who's one of the heavies. And it was sure a beast preparing, but it was fun once we got into it. So here's something that I learned from one of my cousins, who was now retired, was a 5th and 6th grade teacher for over 30 years. And she told me about something that she had experienced before she even became a teacher in her teacher education classes. One of her teachers had the class put all the desks to one side of the room. They got it to the back of the room, and then he had them get, or maybe she, I'm not sure, down on their knees, their hands and knees, bark like dogs, and race to the front of the room and then race back again. And basically what she explained was like, well, once you're willing to do that, once we had done that, then anything else we were going to have to do in front of a class was going to be easy by comparison, because nothing could be as silly or as stupid as that. But we also had a good time doing it. So the dog race, which you see here, this isn't quite a dog race, but you see some human beings down walking themselves and looking foolish, that this is a part of learning to be comfortable with not being afraid to be foolish. Because if you're going to be a teacher, then you're always going to be stiff and wooden unless you're willing to look foolish occasionally. And mostly you're not going to be looking foolish. Okay, so let's summarize the stand-up skills here. The first thing is to over-prepare so you can observe student responses. And this is a term, there's a term for this called with-itness. And with-itness is a term I've seen for over 50 years, means that you really are able to pay attention and see everything that's going on in your class. You can only do that if you're over-prepared. The second idea is to take stage, which is a theater term, which means that you're willing to be the center of attention, at least briefly, even if there are a dozen other people on stage at the time. The third is you need to project. It's necessary to speak a little more loudly than you think necessary, because, and I don't always do this, so I have to be reminded, or I have to remind myself. I need to keep my voice up so that it's easy for people to hear. So I wasn't doing these things in part because when I first started out, I wasn't sufficiently prepared. And one of my students said, "You're lecturing to your shoes." Now, this was a very nervy student who I happened to be married with, and she happened to be taking a class with me because she was working on a degree that required a class that only I was teaching. But when she said that, it was like, oh, well, that's not good. I need to prepare better so that I don't have to do that. So I can not be focusing on what I'm going to say, but so I can be focusing on looking at people. 3 more things. You need to move around. You can move around at the front, you can move to the side, all kinds of things. And then you also need to make eye contact with people, so they know that you're paying attention to them. And then finally, to relax, breathe, and smile. Because if you're having a good time, if I'm having a good time presenting, then probably the learners are going to be having a good time too. And the more the learners are having a good time and are involved, the more they're going to be learning. When we're stressed, we tend to revert back into ourselves. Or when we're bored, we tend to revert back into ourselves and we're not learning as much. So how do you improve? Well, none of these things are comfortable that I'm going to put up. I've used all of them. One is to use a mirror. I actually have a number of mirrors in my music room that I set up so that when we're working on a play that can actually see what I'm looking like. The other is to have others observe. Don't wait for your principal to come in where you're under a lot of pressure. Invite your friends, a fellow teacher, to come in and observe for 10, 15 minutes and tell you, well, what am I doing well? What can I improve on? And then lastly, which takes a lot of courage, is to just videotape yourself and see how you're doing. These all take a lot of courage, but the feedback can really help. Now, I'm telling you to do these things, but was I comfortable doing any of these things? No, absolutely not. It took several decades for me to get into this. And I guess I'm just a slow learner. And I think if you do a little of these things at a time, small changes, you're going to find that you're not going to take nearly as long as I did. So to summarize, organizing the material is going to help the students organize the material. If you have 2 teachers presenting the same material, the one teacher who's better organized is going to have students who learn the material better. Second, you need to pick the kind of involvement activities that involve your situation so that you're periodically interrupting yourself and getting feedback from the students by having them ask you questions, asking them for answers, doing short activities, getting them to take some notes, doing reviewing. There could be other things as well. And then third, practicing your stand-up skills and having fun with it. So that's chapter 13 on presenting. There's a final page in the book, which is called the afterword, that I'd like to talk about briefly, because this is our last presentation. We'll never be perfect, but we can always be better. And I think this is a big Glasser theme. In fact, I think everything that I've presented, you can find in Glasser in his books and at the conferences that he's been involved in. And so I always recommend the books and the conferences. There's so much that I learned, and the training as well. So much I've learned by doing these. In each of the presentations, in each of the chapters, what we've really been talking about is reflective practice, because reflective practice is really best practice. There are thousands of best practices. You can't do them all. What you need to do is to revise and plan and read and then make small changes in what you've been doing. Observe the results, then reflect what worked, what didn't work, and then come back and see, well, what's a small change I can make in what I've been doing? And if you do this, you're not going to be a master teacher after a month or even a year, but after doing this for a number of years, you begin to acquire new skills. Always remember the idea of the difference between 25 years experience and 1 year of experience 25 times. This is how you get 25 years of experience. So summing up everything, you need to focus on deciding what students need to do and then teaching the behavior that you want to see, not the answers, but rather the kind of thinking behavior, the participating behavior, the involvement behavior that you want to see, the attention behavior, and then monitoring that behavior, and then making small changes. So everything that I've presented here is not a should. It's not a system. It's not saying you ought to do this. It's saying observe what's going on in class, reflect, and then you decide which things resonate with you, which are going to work for you, and then make some small changes. Finally, we all need to remember learning is what humans do. I love watching, I think we all love seeing babies and small children because they're so much fun when they're attentive and paying attention and trying to figure out and are curious. Whether we're teachers or students, we're all learners. When we're connecting with others while working to achieve difficult things, that's what brings us joy. And that's what we're looking for. Mona sent me a beautiful tape a couple of weeks ago, and I finally got a chance to see it. And it was all about a teacher, Ms. Mendez, if I remember correctly, showing herself and the students being joyfully involved in being involved together, in connecting together and in learning. So thank you very much.
So decades, huh? You have certainly become good with Zoom, learned it quickly, and even to when a light falls off, you are not frustrated, just picked up and graciously went on.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Are we now on have I taken off the
Yes, you
screen?
took
Oh,
the
okay,
screen
good.
down.
Good.
And so I'm wondering, would you explain a little bit more what you meant by think, pair, share?
Think, pair, share is one of the Kagan involvement theories. Okay, you ask students to think about a topic. What do you know about X? Then you give them a minute to do that. Then you have them share with a partner what they thought about, and then you call on members of different teams, either all of them or maybe a few of them. I like the idea of each time you do a think, pair, share. It only takes a minute or two. You just call on a few people, a few volunteers, and you get some feedback on what it is. that they're doing. And other people use this. Sid Simon used a lot of things like this. And I learned things from Sid Simon workshops and going to Kagan workshops.
And
John
so that
Simon.
kind of goes hand in hand with your being unpredictable.
Well, what you're going to do is you're going to do the think, pair, share over and over and over until it is very predictable, so that when you introduce it, they know exactly what to do. But then who you call on to say, okay, share something that you learned in your group of two, that's the unpredictable part.
Oh, okay. Okay. And that unpredictable, if I'm understanding what you were saying, that whenever things become too predictable, we kind of relax back into our creative mind and are not paying attention.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah, we get bored. On the other hand, you don't want to have things too unpredictable either. So
Right, right. Well, thank you very much. This was very enlightening. And how at the end of the book, you know, just kind of summarize the whole entire book. And it's been very interesting. All of the previous 12 or 13 programs have been recorded, and they are on the Glasser website, and they're free, so you can go and watch them. And it's good to have you here. We're going to stop the recording, and those of you that are present can ask questions and make comments.